This is Gerace. It's a town in Calabria at the southern tip of the Italian boot. We have been making our way further and further south till we're right at the extremity of the Italian mainland. It's characteristic of a lot of the towns here, raised implausibly high up on a high plateau, the tight medieval streets bounded on all sides by the limits of the terrain, and it's filled with ancient churches, some even more ancient catacombs, and the ruins of a Norman castle. We'll be there shortly. For now, we're picking up the story just at Stilo, which was another incredible mountain community here. You can catch much more of that in the episode before this, so go to the playlist. But for now, title card. So we are Forest Archaic Collective, and as well as making jungle drum and bass, we've followed ancient sites across Europe and beyond, whether it's Neolithic standing stones, Roman arches, or Romanesque churches. We are proudly and resolutely AI-free. We've always believed that if we're going to share these stories about ancient places, we need to go and film them for ourselves, not just spam a stock library, definitely not just get the data centers to slop out some half-plausible looking garbage, actually go and see these things for ourselves to show you. So please support us in doing that. More on how at the end of the video and in the description. By the way, we've got the next round of the game to run at the end of the episode, so stick around for the results. Well, picking up from last time, having just seen this monastery, which was a considerable walk away, I had to play roulette with would the local bus show up. It was a slight issue that it was a Saturday, so not entirely clear if the schedule would still stand on weekends or if it was up to date at all. I'd afforded myself a little extra time if I was going to need to walk back, but I was pretty burnt out already. Remember, we'd already climbed up a mountain to see a castle first thing in the morning and then walked about 2 hours, so I could really just use sitting on a bus at this point. And thankfully, so we're on this surprisingly chunky bus considering the small towns it's serving, but that got us back to Stilo. I had a bit of time just to wander the streets and see a little bit more. You know, as a Brit, if I was expecting like stock images of a small Italian town, kind of like the ones you sometimes get on the walls in large coffee chains, this is kind of what you'd expect. But of course, it doesn't exist just to be a museum or model village. You know, it's a rather delightfully quirky, lived in, slightly crumbling, sometimes a bit decrepit, but intensely human place to be. And just before leaving, I almost missed this, but as is always the case with these hilltop towns, you know, line of sight is not always that clear, but this is a Byzantine-era church. It definitely hasn't had the care of the other two major ones in the area. What has survived is pretty impressive, but hard to tell for how much longer, in this shape at least. So then, getting the train from Monasterace, 15 minutes down the line, the town of Ionica has a small Roman theatre. Yeah, look at that. That's pretty dope. But just after an hour and a half, back on the train and out to Locri. Now, something I entirely failed to understand. Everything seemed shuttered on a Saturday afternoon. For context, both in Monasterace, which is pretty quiet, and in Stilo, which is pretty remote, everything was seemingly open on the Friday. So after ending up doing the same in Ionica, in Locri, I just found myself on this endless march trying to find a supermarket or a bar or just anything, and wandering these long streets with nothing open except for the barbers. The barbers were all still open. Eventually found an espresso at this bakery. What do we think? Will this have a toilet seat? Hey, there is a toilet seat. Sorry, missing context. Something that became a running motif. Toilet seats have been curiously absent for a lot of this trip through southern Italy. Needed somewhere to sit, so another espresso and a beer and a chance to pause. Then it was a taxi again, this time heading up to Gerace. It was a similar situation as Stilo. You know, Locri is the coastal town, but then just over 10 kilometers inland on a high rocky plateau is Gerace. I was in a funny headspace. You know, I was exhausted from the day, but also energized that all the connections had worked out and I was actually in the place I needed to be for the evening. My host was a short but pleasant guy. The apartment was large and a little anachronistic, but checked in. I decided to head out into the town and make the most of the daylight, so took a wander through the streets to see what I'd find. It definitely has that sort of small town charm. It's not quite as tight as Stilo, such that the cars are still, you know, with some difficulty heading up and down the roads. Got a look at the castle. It's actually separated from the town by a small dip, and without a bit of free climbing, no access. But you can see the round tower as well as the ruins of an entrance. Got a bit of a wider look at Gerace as well. Amazing views off to the mountains in all directions, like the Calabria landscape had been an incredible treat. Heading back to the cathedral, I had not realised just how much of this was covered by scaffolding, so Yeah, not the greatest views ever. Caught a few other historic churches and generally followed my nose through the town. Some Gothic details in general. I mean, these catacombs mark an early church, possibly from around the 600s to 700s, cut into the rock on the eastern side of the town. I was eager to explore, but I was also craving a bit of comfort. I ended up just walking around trying to find a shop with a beer fridge. In the end, paid more than it was probably worth from a takeout place, but whatever. It was just nice to have a cold beer. Quick breather before I headed out into Jerace. The square has an ATM that doesn't charge, which all felt like a near miracle. And okay, so I keyed in a restaurant on the map. Not open. Well, okay, free choice then. So kept walking. Oh, okay, next one, also not open. Next, no, okay, no, nowhere. There was nowhere. There were a couple of cafes where I could have got an espresso or an ice cream, but a hot meal, nowhere. And after 20 minutes of crisscrossing the streets, if the main street in this town didn't have a single restaurant open, it boded little hope for some tiny back street. Maybe there was a local spot that I didn't find. Ended up the only place serving a hot meal was the pizza takeout place that had overcharged for the beer, so I'll just be sitting at home eating takeout. This feels like a stupid problem to have. Again, Stilo is, if anything, more remote, and I did not have this problem. There was even a butcher open at like 8 p.m. You're telling me this town can't manage one sit-down restaurant in April? It's not like we're in the grips of winter, and we're in Italy, famed perhaps above all else for its food. And here's me giving distinctly divorced dad energy, just eating a takeout pizza alone in a sparsely furnished apartment. Okay, so I was a little hangry after a day of pretty much just espresso and beer. Anyway, thank goodness there was a pizza place. Would have hit the roof if the best I could manage was just a pastry from a cafe. Another quite chilly night up, kind of higher in the hills. Got up with the sun and headed out to catch a bit more of Jerace. It was mostly a retread of the previous day. The town was really nice in the morning, but I felt like I'd mostly caught what I needed to in the town. It feels like we're being a bit brief. Okay, here's where we're at. So, for the last episode, on top of all the work I'd already put in, I had to pull this, 22-hour editing spree, only crashing out in the evening when I literally just couldn't keep my eyes open to edit anymore, and then getting up at 5 a.m. and just keeping going. I had a hard deadline of Monday as we were taking a tour of Germany and the Benelux countries. We sort of caught a huge amount from recreated Roman forts and temples, Aachen Cathedral, that's been a goal since forever. Anyway, so having completely fried myself to get the last Calabria episode up, YouTube rewarded us with the worst view count we've had since... Actually, no, even when we had 100 subs, we still didn't do this badly. I've got friends who are in a similar position. You push and you push, and this website just scornfully mocks your pitiful attempts at making something meaningful and just smothers it to death in a cupboard. We've spent over 7 years now crisscrossing Europe, catching all of this, and now the platform seems determined to ensure that we fail in complete obscurity. It is... extraordinarily disheartening. It's absolutely crushing. So look, a lot more of the specific historic details around towns like Jerace and Stilo we were saving for our Norman series and others. I held off doing those precisely because I didn't want to leave huge gaps. I wanted to get to all these places and film them, but I don't know if this is going to even be possible. We're going to be launching these series sooner than we'd hoped because with what we're currently doing, the platform is just bludgeoning us to death. So beginning next year, we're going to be on this massive journey of the Normans across Britain and Ireland, as well as France, and yes, their conquest of southern Italy and Sicily. As part of that, we've got a huge number of ruined abbeys to show you. These are, hands down, some of the most remarkable places in the British Isles, just absolute works of art that inexplicably rarely seem to get discussed. But so that we actually make it to these series without dropping out of everyone's feeds entirely, we need your help. Specifically, if you hit the bell, you might actually see when we've got episodes out, since the platform seems to actively prevent the nearly 6,000 people who've expressed an interest in our stuff from seeing any of it. That way you'll get notifications, and I mean, all the ways you expect, liking, commenting, that will make a big difference. And hey, look, huge thank you to all of those who are regulars and have helped us kind of keep the lights on. It wasn't anything like this bad in 2025. I have no clue what we've done to deserve this, but there it is. Well, back to this trip. Quick espresso. I had decided to get a taxi for 9. There'd actually been no signs of buses, and the sort of 90 plus minutes walk just didn't seem like a good use of time. So, got to see the same driver again. Nice chance for a conversation about southern Italy and England and just everything else. And this got me both level with the coast again and to Lochry Archaeological Park. This is an interesting one. It's staffed and it has a museum and is laid out as if it's expecting a high volume of visitors, but it's somewhat out of the way from Lochry town. And it's a selection of excavations over quite a wide area. It was free entry on this day somehow, but some areas were not open, so I just caught what I could. So there's kind of various ruins ranging from classical era Greek to the Roman era. Just aside, this is going to mean basically nothing to anyone but a small cabal of like music theory nerds, but if you know your modes, so the Locrian mode of the major scale is the weirdest and most impossible to utilize. Okay, this is what it sounds like. Yeah, so flat second, flat fifth. Unless you're like Bjork, you are not making a song in Locrian. Well, the modes, so Lydian, Aeolian, etc., they're named after the various regions of Magna Graecia, the diaspora of Greek settlements around the Mediterranean. And I realised, wait a minute, I'm in Lochry. This is where the Locrian mode takes its name. If you go down this rabbit hole, these names do, at least in theory, have some historical basis. They didn't just choose these like sometime in the 1800s just to be cute. I was really taken aback when I discovered that. I don't even know what to do with that. I don't know if the residents of Lochry spent all of their time listening to discordant music that feels like it never resolves. I don't know. Anyway, I then had to take a stroll along the beach to get back to Lochry town, which was, very nice, though I was having to kind of get a bit of a move on to catch the train. I was feeling pretty good at the amount I was managing to accomplish, particularly without a hire car. Because this is going up on English-speaking YouTube, there are, statistically, very few of you who are going to know much about this region. It's not very high on any tourist itineraries. So far from anyone cheering me on, there was always going to be a collective shrug of like, I don't know, was that difficult? I have no idea. But yeah, like just getting out to these places with a mixture of like buses, sometimes a taxi, and then walking, 45 minutes to an hour. It just felt good to be making it happen. Well, quick espresso and then back on the way south on the train, watching the coastline of Calabria flash by. Eventually, as we rounded the southernmost point of mainland Italy and continued round, I suddenly realised I was looking over at Sicily. A mirror image of this happened in 2023 when I was visiting Taormina, and it dawned on me I was looking over at Calabria across the Messina Strait. It is theorised that the Messina Strait was the inspiration for the location of Scylla and Charybdis in the Odyssey. But if you've just been to see that and you're looking at this like wide body of water, like, that's not really how it looked in the film. Well, yeah, there's a lot of that. We did a review of the Odyssey with a wider discussion on the Bronze Age, so have a watch of that if you can. So we pulled into Reggio di Calabria, and this represented something of a pause. The next train was not going to be for a little while. I did have a notion of something I could try, but when I inquired of a taxi driver, he quoted me €60, just for half of the trip. This is only about 30 minutes outside of the town, so that plan abandoned, I wandered into Reggio to take a breather. Now, by the standards of Calabria, this is a pretty big town. I had a quick look at the fragments of the Roman baths near the water. There were even traces of what looked like the ancient city wall. Again, like the previous day, getting food was proving slightly less than straightforward. Surprisingly so, again, considering the size of the city. So I eventually just ducked into the first place that looked like it was serving, had a beer and a pizza. A quick look at the castle. After the Norman conquest, both Italy and Sicily were controlled by a succession of other powers, which happened to be kind of a bit outside my sort of dates of interest. So the remains of this Aragonese castle, which are otherwise very nice, just don't elicit quite as much excitement, for me at least. Headed down to the water, it's undeniably very pleasant here. You're looking across the headland, you can barely perceive where the mainland Italy ends and Sicily begins. Was actually heading towards a recommendation I'd received in a conversation on the train like 48 hours previous. This is an ice cream spot that... people queuing far enough back that adding any more to the queue would actually be obstructing a roundabout. And I just didn't feel like dropping 45 minutes just to stand in a queue. So instead, took a stroll past all these Picasso-looking trees and at length linked back to the train station. I was actually getting pretty drowsy at this stage. All of the walking combined from the last 5 days was just rendering me dead. So, train out to the north, we passed Villa San Giovanni. This is where trains to Sicily actually board a boat, which is kind of fun. Then round and we were at Stilo again with the Odyssey connotations. This, apart from being very beautiful, was a bit of a change. It was the first time in Calabria I'd really seen tourists in any volume. Well, so beach and pretty impressive castle. I wasn't going to be there for long as trains were surprisingly limited. Otherwise I wouldn't have had 3 hours to kill in Reggio. Perhaps unsurprisingly for a castle that high up. Stairs, and lots of them, but mercifully, Stilo this was not, so was up the top before very long. Based on the masonry visible, it does appear that the castle had been remodelled a lot in later centuries, but it was good to have a quick look. Well, down to the station again, and back on the train, and at this point, just again, so drained. While on the one hand, I always know that, my future self will thank me for powering on, but I'm very much my own boss, and when I'm not enjoying myself anymore, it just makes it a lot harder to justify keeping on with the next walk and then the next. It was a lovely day, and the Calabrian Coast flashing by was definitely gorgeous, but really drained at this point. So a little over an hour, we pulled into Tropea. Now, like most other places, your first impression stepping off the train isn't all that, but give it a bit. Firstly, like Stilo, a lot more tourism in evidence, like straight away with the gift shops and the footfall. It was, night and day with the east coast of Calabria. It seems the west coast gets far more people. So before the centrepiece, there was this Normanno-Byzantine cathedral to check out, and just look at that arcading. Beautiful. That might strike you as a funny thing to get all hyped about, but I am totally here for this. Took a quick look inside. You do sometimes get some interesting artifacts on display in churches. I was not expecting to see an unexploded bomb, so that's different. Okay, but following the streets to the end, you may be surprised at how high up above sea level you actually are. The street below is about 5 or 6 stories down, but descending, and I'm just going to let the footage do the talking a second. So yes, this is the Tropea set piece, a beach that sits below this shockingly high rocky outcrop and the buildings above. It's, not hard to see how this place would draw a crowd. I'm at a bit of a loss to compare it to anything else. Just look at it. Honestly, this massively lifted my spirits. The malaise of exhaustion I'd felt on the train had vanished, and suddenly I was having an amazing time once again. And the steps on the western side are a little less severe than on the east. One last thing before looping out. I'd been craving an arancini the whole week, but was waiting for a good one, and passing a small place, I could just grab one before jogging to the train. So my mood on the route back could hardly have been more different than on the way in, was just loving life. Out of curiosity, it is interesting that on a lot of train stations, they might have 2, 3, even 4 platforms, and then all of the trains are just arriving and departing from the same one. Look, whatever works, but judging by the height of some of the weeds here, some of these tracks hadn't seen a train in weeks. And there's the usual contradiction of, don't cross the tracks. Well, okay, unless you do, but that takes a lot of getting used to. We really don't have that in England. Well, back to Reggio. Caught the sun going down over the sea as we made progress south. It seemed to take an interminable time just to cover the last 3 miles of the trip. We were kind of constantly stopping and crawling along. But getting out at a stop at Reggio Lido, the ice cream place from earlier had in no way diminished in popularity, but one arancini does not a square meal make. So I did take this opportunity for another, and then it was time for the hostel. This was a mildly unusual setup. The hostel is fairly hands-off. It doesn't have staff on site per se. You collect the key from the cafe at the base of the building, and then it's up to the 4th floor. It's a pretty nicely done space. The cafe gave me a scare on the way in, suggesting I was meant to check in yesterday, but did eventually give me the key without too much protest, so I made my way to the building quickly to get inside, and if anyone was going to try and evict me, they'd have to come in and get me. I checked my booking. I had selected the correct day. So the only downside, as I've been keen to point out, hostels are the best for the community you get to have with the other people staying, and nope. This was a very nice room, but it was empty, save me. Nice for sleeping, but otherwise kind of boring. I think at various points I heard a couple of others moving in other rooms, but in the absence of a common space, so that was a shame. Anyway, up the next morning to a cloudy day and apparently plenty of rain in the night. Quick espresso after handing back the keys, and then another. Then Reggio Centrale train station, and the train ended up being about 30 minutes late, and even when it did eventually show up, it was moving with all the urgency of an extremely elderly oak tree, but thankfully it did get moving, and we got all the landscape from the previous afternoon scrolling by. There's a curiously massive pylon at the northeastern tip of Sicily. Right, well, this episode might end up being unaccountably shorter than many of my others. This kind of just how things get sliced. I've been squeezed for time to get this out, so yeah, there we go. Before we finish, so quick results from last week's game. First of all, the Monastery of St. Nicola, which was in our recent Albania series. Then this is the Church of, confusingly, this is just known as the Byzantine Church, or the Petra Church at... Yes, Petra in Jordan. Despite there being two other churches within a couple of hundred yards, I guess no dedication for a saint or anything else has survived in writing. Next, it was the Basilica di San Pareto, which is on Majorca. So again, might get some hate mail for grouping that in with Byzantine, despite it being somewhere from around the 5th, 7th centuries. And finally, in Cyprus, well, northern Cyprus, depending on who you ask. Well, okay, so this week, we've been catching a lot of Norman sites around southern Italy, something I've been obviously waiting a long time to do. Now, we're not short a Norman castle or two ourselves here in the British Isles, so go on, why not? We'll just say we're building towards a big Norman series next year, and a lot of these we haven't actually had a chance to feature on the channel yet, so I'm just counting on folks' general knowledge this time. So, some Norman castles for you to identify. Not all of these are going to be in the UK, by the way. Okay, first one. This is modestly famous, and yeah, in pretty amazing condition considering how early it is. Next, and by contrast, this one is a bit tricky to reach by car, or by any mode of transport, in fact. It's somewhat underrated. It's thankfully had some restoration undertaken in previous years. Number 3. Okay, this is of course absent its masonry, but a fantastic surviving motte and bailey. In fact, go on then. Okay, number 4, and slightly cheating, but we have featured this not too long ago, this wonderful reconstructed Motte and Bailey site. And hey, look, number 5, bonus round. We featured this, it's a while ago now, but really fond of this one. Can anyone tell me where this is? So that's all for this week. If you've enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes and you can catch it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support us by flicking us a few quid, that's the place to do it. You notice we're also working to a bit of a backlog. This is from last year, but if you want to catch up with what we're doing on more of a week-by-week basis, you can follow us on Blue Sky. There's loads more of what we're doing up there. And yes, otherwise, you can catch a lot more of this in the Italy playlist, and we've got playlists all sorts. We've got our journeys across Greece. There's loads in there. So why not have a flick through those? And yeah, if you could hit the bell to get notifications, that's really going to make all the difference. And we'll catch you very soon.